everybody, welcome back. For this part of the lecture, we're going to focus on employment as a social determinant of health. And in doing so, we are going to do the following. We'll talk, we'll provide this overview of how employment and unemployment impacts health. Then we'll focus on a little bit more related to workplace conditions and features that impact health and health outcomes with a slant on physical activity, exercise, and nutrition. So why are we talking about work as a social determinant of health? First of all, most adults, most individuals over age 18 spend a significant amount of their waking hours at work. Again, it just takes up a large portion of our lives, right? And during that time, we're kind of wondering, what are we doing and in what way is our job either mitigating stress or possibly causing stress? How are we working? Are we standing up? Are we sitting down? Are we being physically active? If there had been a report a while back saying sitting is the new smoking, which seems, as a public health professor, a bit extreme to me. At the same time, we do know that being sedentary has negative health outcomes. Nevertheless, we're focusing on this because it is what generates, for most of us at least, our personal income, as well as we spend a significant portion of our lives engaging in this thing we call work. So first of all, your textbook in Chapter 8 really does a good job describing how unemployment is extremely unhealthy and increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and increases the likelihood or risk of poor coping mechanisms such as smoking and alcohol consumption and even the use of prescription drugs. But over time, we see that it does increase risk factors for heart disease. So how does unemployment hurt us exactly? Well, there may be individual factors such as loss of personal resources that increases personal stress. It can impact your family and your family relationships. And unemployment can lead to family breakdown or the effects of what can occur when a family is forced to relocate due to a new job opportunity. It can also impact your living conditions. Take, for instance, you're living in a community where unemployment is rising. You might find that the neighborhood begins to deteriorate. This is part of the broken window theory, that deterioration leads to further deterioration. This particular information comes from the Huffington Post, from an article posted in 2014, which describes ways that unemployment can hurt cardiovascular health, how it can impact children and their schooling, how it can impact your fitness, which, by the way, applying for jobs sometimes often feels like it's very own job, except it's an unpaid job, right? And you're preparing for these jobs and you're trying to get your name out to different employers, and it can be incredibly stressful when you're not getting the kind of response that you want. I call it organizational ghosting, when you apply for a job and then you never hear back from that employer ever again. People do it. I don't think it's necessarily ethical, but it happens, right? Because there are so many applicants per job. Anyway, that was a tangent. Can lead to chronic conditions. It can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, suicide, and again, abuse of prescription medication. It's associated with increased smoking and alcohol consumption. And the longer a person's employed, the risk of subsequent illness, which increases the likelihood that you'll have a hard time going back to work. And it can negatively impact your mental health, where you feel like you have this lack of control, which is often linked to depression and fear of not being able to be employed, which can be linked back to anxiety. So in the next set of slides, in the next video lecture, we'll talk specifically more about what this model is saying. This is in your textbook. It was published by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 2011, and it just talks about how your workplace affects your physical health, your mental health and stress, and then your resources and opportunities, and even the benefits that are associated with your job. Take, for instance, if you're working for a larger organization that helps subsidize the cost of your health insurance. Often that's an employee benefit that will impact your access to care. But it also relates back to your financial resources, which impact your housing, which impact your leisure time activity, which also impact which not that your leisure time activity impacts your ability to obtain nutritious foods, but your income also impacts your ability to afford some of these healthier, fresher foods, such as your fruits and vegetables, right? And all of this in turn impacts your physical and mental health. Again, we'll go into more detail about this in an upcoming recorded lecture. So how does work impact our lives? Well, first of all, again, it is the main source of individuals' personal income. And that leads you to be able to afford your life's expenses, your house, your mode of transportation, whether it's public transportation or shoes that you use in order to walk where you're going, or your car, right? It impacts your access to care in the sense of, can you afford health insurance? Can you afford to pay out of pocket if you don't have health insurance? Um, so again, income is really one of the most prominent social determinants of health, and work directly impacts that. A lot of people, their work is also part of their identity. As being a professor, I greatly identify with being both a teacher and a researcher. And there almost seems to be a social position and even within, I guess, class associated with both your income as well as your identity in your career. It gives you a sense of self-worth and a sense of purpose. I think I've mentioned before in these slides that I used to teach a Theories of Human Growth and Development course. And one thing that people who go into retirement often struggle with is, what next? What do I do now? And how do I define myself? What do I do with all the spare time now that I'm not working for 8+ hours a day? Well, again, your job, your career gives you that sense of self-worth, your place in society, how you're giving back. And it also gives you an additional social network where your colleagues, your boss, the people you manage, etc., are all part of your social network. So when you're no longer working, you might lose that social network and you might lose that connection with other people and that thing you had in common, right? That job, that career, the tasks you were working on together. Your workplace provides the conditions for where you spend most of your waking hours. You know, are you in a condition that is healthy and encourages physical activity and reduces the likelihood of you being sedentary? Or are you living in having a job that you bend over, that you put a lot of strain on your body? These are all conditions that are impacted by where you work. Um, there's the stress or lack thereof based on your level of control within your job. If you can remember that term health wealth gradient, as well as the term that's introduced to you in your textbook in this chapter, ISO strain, that refers back to isolated strain, right? Are you isolated within your job, and how much strain is put on your body and your physical and mental well-being in that job? And the health wealth gradient says people who have a higher income but also have higher levels of control within their job fare the best, whereas people with low income and very low control in their job, they're constantly changing tasks, they're doing shift work, they are interrupted when they're engaging in certain types of tasks and redirected to complete other types of tasks. This leads to stress, and people with lower income and lower perceived control tend to fare more poorly in terms of health. And then also your work impacts your benefits. Do you have time off? Do you not have time off? Do you have maternity or paternity leave? Your textbook does a really great job describing differences between the United States and gives the exact extreme opposite of Sweden, where people are given, both mothers and fathers are given a full year off, and their job is still waiting and ready for them when they return from maternity or paternity leave. And countries vary in how much they offer time off for new parents to adjust to the new normal of taking care of a new baby, which requires a lot more resources and time, and you're not sleeping, and it can be a very stressful time for new parents. But again, it also provides you other benefits, in some cases, dental insurance, just regular healthcare insurance, vision insurance. Again, a whole host of benefits that come with your job. So to discuss the health wealth gradient, by the way, this comes from the reading called Sick of Poverty. And this just illustrates the health wealth gradient where the more you're being paid, and also the more control you have within your job, right? If you see yourself as a higher status worker and you've got more control, you get to decide what you do most of the time. You're not just necessarily directed and interrupted in the tasks that you're trying to accomplish for your job. Then that leads to better health outcomes. There are also two explanatory models of workplace impact on health as introduced via your textbook. One is the demand control model. And in this model, it talks about how the demands of which you have to complete as an employee and your ability to actually meet those demands will impact your health. So take, for instance, you have a high demand job and there's a lot of pressure and you've got deadlines around the clock and your work is very quickly paced. And you're having a hard time concentrating at work, which, by the way, I recently listened to a podcast by Hidden Brain, which talks about these open space offices, which are meant to facilitate collaboration, often don't allow people the privacy they need to think through certain tasks. So it actually reduces people's ability to be productive. Anyway, so if you have a higher demand psychologically and physically, hopefully you've got control to meet those demands. But if you have low decision-making power, you don't get to schedule how you're going to complete these tasks. You're not allowed to creatively decide how to confront the issues that you face at work, that leads to a mismatch in demand and control. This mismatch can lead to poor health by increasing emotional exhaustion, increasing depression, nervousness, and anxiety, decreasing your perceived health, your self-rated health, increasing sleep disturbances and difficulty waking up because you didn't have high quality sleep, decreased job satisfaction, and increased risk for metabolic syndrome and heart disease. In essence, it creates job strain. And so you want these levels of demand and control to match for having a healthier lifestyle and having healthy employees. The second model is called the effort reward model. And it basically implies that the more effort that you exert, the more you expect a reward via a salary or money or benefits, esteem by your peers and colleagues, and security and opportunity within your own job, that you're not going to get fired by working harder, that you'll be able to receive some type of promotion, and that you'll be given opportunities to grow and to expand your skill set, to continue making yourself a valuable member to that organization. When there is a mismatch or a lack of reciprocity between this effort and reward, we see individuals developed or increase their risk for heart disease, decrease their self-rated health, so more often scoring as less than good or poor health. Increased psychological disorders, again, really focusing on depression, the common cold of mental health disorders, right? And anxiety, which, by the way, it's important to note that 1 out of every 5 adults in the United States experiences some form of chronic depression or anxiety. So it's really also interesting to see that it could be related to this mismatch in either demand control or effort reward in our careers, in our workplaces, and even our education system that can exacerbate these conditions. And there's also more pronounced emotional exhaustion. You'll see that people will experience illness symptoms and express job dissatisfaction when there's a mismatch in the amount of effort you're putting forth and whether or not you're being rewarded for those efforts. So with that said, that's the end of this part of the lecture, and we've got a couple more coming that really, again, talk more in depth about where you work, the conditions that you work, the types of activities in which you're engaging in, the nutritious nutrition options you have at the workplace and how that impacts health.